My name is Victoria, and I am 28 years old. Growing up with a single mom wasn't easy, but we had each other. At least that's what I thought until she met Howard. Suddenly, the woman who had been my rock disappeared into her new perfect family, leaving me behind like yesterday's trash. I survived, built my own life, even bought my own small apartment. Then one day she reappeared, demanding what was mine, as if abandoning me meant nothing. Let me tell you how I finally stood up to the woman who gave birth to me, but forgot how to be a mother. Before I get into my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to family who tried to take advantage of you. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for how I finally found the courage to say no. I grew up in Millfield, a small town in Ohio, where everyone knew everyone's business. My mom, Janet, raised me on her own after my father left when I was just 2 years old. I have almost no memories of him, just a few faded photographs and the stories my mom would tell on those rare occasions when she was feeling nostalgic rather than bitter. Our life wasn't easy. Janet worked as a waitress at the local diner during the day and cleaned office buildings at night. Despite working nearly 80 hours a week, we still struggled to keep the lights on. There were many nights I fell asleep to the sound of my mother crying at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills she couldn't pay. Despite our financial struggles, Janet and I were close. On Sunday afternoons, her only time off, we would bake cookies together or watch old movies on our secondhand TV. She would brush my long brown hair while telling me stories about her childhood, promising that someday things would be better for us. "You're smart, Victoria," she would say. "Smarter than I ever was. You're going to go to college and have a wonderful life. You'll see." When I was 8, my mom managed to save enough for us to visit the local county fair. I remember the excitement of riding the Ferris wheel, eating cotton candy, and winning a small stuffed bear at the ring toss. It wasn't an extravagant outing by most standards, but for us, it was magical. That night, as she tucked me into bed, I told her she was the best mom in the world. The look of pride in her eyes is something I'll never forget. My grandparents, Janet's parents, lived about an hour away. They helped when they could, but they weren't well off themselves. Still, they made sure I had birthday and Christmas presents and occasionally took me for weekends to give my mom a break. My grandmother taught me how to make her famous apple pie, while my grandfather showed me how to fish in the creek behind their house. On my father's side, I had only my grandmother Rose. She lived in Florida, and I saw her rarely, maybe once every few years. She would send cards for my birthday with $20 tucked inside and call on holidays. I didn't know her well, but she always seemed kind in our limited interactions. School became my sanctuary. I loved learning and threw myself into my studies, earning straight A's throughout elementary school. My teachers often told my mom I had potential, suggesting she look into scholarship programs for when I got older. Janet would nod politely, but later confessed to me she was scared about how we would ever afford college, even with scholarships. In 6th grade, I met Samantha Johnson when we were paired together for a science project. With her wild curly hair and contagious laugh, Sam quickly became my best friend. Her family was middle class, her dad a plumber, and her mom a nurse. The Johnson house became my second home, a place where I could experience a sense of normalcy and stability. The summer before high school, my mother started dating a man named Greg. He seemed nice enough, bringing flowers when he picked her up and always asking about my day. For a few months, I allowed myself to imagine what it might be like to have a complete family. But like the others before him, Greg eventually disappeared from our lives, leaving my mother heartbroken again. Janet had a younger sister, Grace, who lived in New York City. Aunt Grace would visit once or twice a year, bringing stories of her exciting life as a book editor. She always brought me books, feeding my love for reading and encouraging my dreams of a life beyond Millfield. Unlike my mother, Aunt Grace had gone to college and established a career she loved. "You remind me of myself at your age," she told me once, "hungry for knowledge and adventure. Don't let anything hold you back, Victoria." As I entered high school, I became increasingly aware of our financial situation. I started working at the local grocery store after school, and on weekends bagging groceries and stocking shelves. The money I earned went mostly toward household bills, though Mom insisted I save some for myself. Between work, school, and helping at home, I had little time for normal teenage activities. While other girls my age went to parties and sporting events, I was either studying or working. Despite the challenges, I maintained my grades and joined the debate team, discovering I had a talent for public speaking. My English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, took a special interest in me staying after school to help me prepare college applications and scholarship essays. "Your circumstances don't define you," she would say. "Your response to them does." Throughout those years, Janet continued to work her two jobs. I could see the toll it took on her, the way exhaustion had etched permanent lines around her eyes and mouth. Still, she attended every debate competition and beamed with pride at parent-teacher conferences. When I was accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, she took me out to dinner at the diner where she worked the waitstaff, bringing us free dessert to celebrate. That night, as we walked home under the stars, Janet squeezed my hand and said, "You're going to have the life I always wanted for you, Victoria. You're going to break the cycle." I believed her. I believed in us. I had no idea that within a year, everything would change, and the mother who had sacrificed so much for me would become someone I barely recognized. The spring of my senior year, my mother came home from her waitressing shift practically glowing. At first, I thought she had received a raise or perhaps a better job offer. Instead, she announced she had met someone. "His name is Howard," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "He came into the diner for lunch, left me a $100 tip on a $20 meal. Can you believe it?" Howard Graham was a real estate developer from Cleveland who had been in town scouting potential properties. Tall, with salt and pepper hair and an expensive watch, he represented everything my mother had never had: security status wealth. "He's taking me to dinner on Saturday," she told me, already digging through her closet for something suitable to wear, "at that fancy new restaurant downtown." I helped her pick out an outfit, did her makeup, and waited up to hear about the date. When she came home just after midnight, she looked like a teenager, giddy and flushed. Howard had been a perfect gentleman, she said. He had ordered wine she couldn't pronounce and insisted she try the lobster. He found her stories about small-town life charming and wanted to see her again. What started as weekend visits quickly escalated. Howard began driving the 2 hours from Cleveland multiple times a week. He would show up with designer clothes for my mother, claiming they had caught his eye and made him think of her. Soon, Janet was wearing makeup and styled her hair every day just in case. Howard surprised her with a visit. Howard's background seemed impressive on paper. After a successful career in corporate law, he had started his own real estate development company. Divorced for 5 years, he had 2 teenagers from his previous marriage, Amanda, 16, and Derek, 18. He owned a sprawling house in an exclusive Cleveland suburb and drove a Mercedes that cost more than our entire house. I tried to be happy for my mom. After years of struggle and sacrifice, perhaps she deserved someone who would take care of her for a change. But something about Howard made me uneasy. The way his eyes assessed everything as if calculating its value. The casual manner in which he dropped names and prices into conversation. The slight curl of his lip when he looked around our small, shabby house. As their relationship progressed, my mother began to change. First, it was small things. She stopped watching our Sunday afternoon movies, explaining that Howard wanted to take her to brunch at his country club. She traded her comfortable clothes for more fashionable outfits Howard had bought her. Her language shifted, adopting phrases and opinions that sounded like his rather than her own. The first time Howard invited me to join them for dinner, I hoped my concerns were unfounded. Maybe he genuinely cared for my mother. Maybe this could work out well for both of us. The restaurant was the most expensive in town, with dim lighting and waiters in formal attire. I felt immediately out of place in my simple dress from the department store. Howard ordered for all of us without consulting the menu, waving away my attempt to choose my own meal. "Trust me," he said with a condescending smile. "You've probably never had cuisine like this." Throughout dinner, he dominated the conversation with stories about his business deals and social connections. Whenever I tried to contribute, he would nod politely before returning to his monologue. My mother, instead of including me as she normally would, seemed content to gaze adoringly at him, laughing at his jokes and asking questions that allowed him to further showcase his success. When the topic turned to my college plans, I mentioned my scholarship to State University and my plans to major in marketing. "State University." Howard raised an eyebrow. "Janet, you didn't tell me Victoria was going there. Not exactly prestigious, is it?" My mother looked uncomfortable. It's a good school and Victoria got a wonderful scholarship. Howard turned to me with what I'm sure he thought was a benevolent expression. You know I have connections at several Ivy League schools. With a sizable donation, we might be able to get you into somewhere more suitable. The implication that my hard-earned achievement was somehow inadequate stung, but I forced a smile. I appreciate the thought, but I'm excited about State. They have an excellent marketing program. Marketing, he pronounced the word as if it tasted bad. Well, I suppose that's practical. Though in my experience, most marketing people are just failed business majors. The evening continued in this vein, with Howard subtly undermining me while appearing outwardly supportive. My mother, who had always been my fiercest defender, said nothing, just squeezed my hand under the table as if asking me to be patient. Over the next few months, I saw less and less of Janet. She began spending weekends in Cleveland with Howard meeting his friends and shopping at stores we used to walk by but never enter. When she was home, our conversations revolved almost entirely around Howard, his children, and their social circle. Amanda has the most beautiful room, she would tell me. All white furniture with gold accents, and her closet is bigger than our bathroom. Or, Howard's taking me to a charity gala next weekend. The tickets cost $1,000 each. Can you imagine? I tried to be supportive, asking questions and expressing appropriate enthusiasm, but I couldn't ignore the growing distance between us. The woman who had once shared every detail of her day with me now seemed to exist in a world I couldn't access. The engagement announcement came 6 months after they met. Howard proposed at an exclusive restaurant in Cleveland, presenting my mother with a diamond ring that must have cost more than she made in a year. She called me crying with happiness, and I forced excitement into my voice while feeling like I was losing her. The wedding was planned for December, giving them just 4 months to prepare. My mother threw herself into wedding planning with an intensity I had never seen from her. Suddenly, the woman who had always been careful with money was discussing floral arrangements that cost thousands and dresses with five-figure price tags, all covered by Howard, of course. When I expressed concern about the speed of their relationship, Janet brushed me off. Howard says, when you know, she said. Besides Victoria, I'm not getting any younger. This might be my last chance at real happiness. The statement hurt more than she could know. Had she not been happy with me? Had our life together been so terrible that she was willing to erase it for a man she barely knew? Howard's children, Amanda and Derek, made no effort to welcome either of us into their lives. The few times I met them before the wedding, they were polite but distant, clearly viewing Janet and me as interlopers. Amanda, with her perfect blonde hair and designer clothes, made a point of mentioning her mother, Howard's first wife, at every opportunity. Daddy always says no one makes roast beef like Mom, she would say as Janet served dinner. Or, this house has been in our family for generations. Dad would never sell it no matter what. The message was clear: Janet might be marrying their father, but she would never truly be part of their family, and neither would I. The wedding was held at Howard's Country Club, an opulent affair with 200 guests, most of whom Janet had never met. I stood beside my mother as her maid of honor, feeling like an actress in a play rather than a daughter, sharing a momentous occasion. Janet looked beautiful in her designer gown, her hair and makeup professionally done, but something about her smile seemed practiced, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as everyone else that this was her dream come true. My grandparents attended, but seemed as out of place as I felt among Howard's wealthy friends and business associates. Aunt Grace couldn't make it, sending a lovely gift and a note that, reading between the lines, expressed concern about the hasty marriage. At the reception, I was seated at a table with distant cousins of Howard's, rather than at the main family table. Janet didn't seem to notice or mind this slight. She was too busy circulating among her new social set, Howard's hand firmly at the small of her back, guiding her movements. After the wedding, Janet and Howard left for a 3-week honeymoon in Europe. Before leaving, she hugged me tightly and promised we would talk often. "This is good for both of us," she whispered. "You'll see. Howard says once you finish college, he can get you a position at one of his friends' companies. No more struggling for either of us." But the daily calls I expected never materialized. Instead, I received occasional texts with photos of famous landmarks and brief messages about the amazing food or the beautiful hotel. It was as if she was sending postcards to an acquaintance rather than sharing her life with her daughter. When they returned, Janet immediately moved into Howard's Cleveland home. Our small house in Millfield, with all its memories, was put up for sale, the contents either donated or packed away in storage. I was already living in the college dorms, but coming home for Christmas to find our house empty and impersonal felt like having the ground disappear beneath my feet. I spent that Christmas at Howard's house sleeping in one of the guest rooms that was larger than the living room of our old home. The house was professionally decorated for the holidays, with a 12-foot tree covered in matching ornaments and coordinated gifts wrapped by a personal shopper. It was beautiful but sterile, lacking the warmth and personal touch of our humble celebrations. Christmas dinner was a formal affair with Howard's business associates and their families. Janet wore a red designer dress and played the role of gracious hostess, seeming more like a stranger than the woman who had once made paper snowflakes with me and baked cookies for our neighbors. In the months that followed, communication with my mother became increasingly sparse. She would call once a week at first, then once every 2 weeks, then monthly. Our conversations became superficial, revolving around her social engagements and charity work rather than any meaningful exchange. When I shared my struggles with difficult classes or roommate drama, she would listen distractedly before changing the subject to her interior decorator's latest suggestions or the vacation they were planning to the Maldives. As my freshman year progressed, I found myself facing challenges I had never anticipated. My scholarship covered tuition, but not living expenses. And without Janet's financial support, limited as it had been, I struggled to afford textbooks and meals. I took a job at the campus coffee shop and picked up tutoring gigs, but still barely made ends meet. When I called Janet to explain my situation, hoping for some assistance, she seemed uncomfortable. "I'll have to talk to Howard," she said. "He handles all the finances now." A week later, she called back to say Howard had suggested I apply for student loans like normal college students. The fact that she would defer such a decision to him and that he would so casually dismiss my needs confirmed my growing fear that I was no longer a priority in her life. That summer, instead of going home, I stayed on campus and worked full-time. Janet and Howard were traveling through Asia anyway, and the thought of staying in their house alone, surrounded by their wealth and reminders of my mother's new life, was too painful. In my sophomore year, I met Michael in my marketing research class. Tall, with kind eyes and an easy laugh, he became my study partner and eventually my boyfriend. Michael came from a middle-class family in Illinois, his father a high school teacher and his mother a nurse. They had raised him with values similar to those Janet had instilled in me before Howard: hard work, education, kindness, and integrity. When Michael invited me home with him for Thanksgiving, I experienced what a loving, normal family felt like. His parents welcomed me warmly, including me in their traditions and treating me like one of their own. His younger sister, Lily, immediately adopted me as the big sister she never had, showing me her art projects and asking for advice about boys. For the first time in over a year, I felt I belonged somewhere. That Christmas, Janet called to say they would be spending the holidays at Howard's ski chalet in Aspen with important business contacts. She suggested I could join them if I wanted, but didn't sound particularly enthusiastic about the prospect. I declined spending Christmas with Michael's family instead, where I received thoughtful personal gifts and genuine affection, rather than the expensive but impersonal items Janet now sent for birthdays and holidays. By the end of my sophomore year, Janet's calls had dwindled to once a month at most, and even those conversations felt forced and distant. She rarely asked about my classes or friends, instead filling the time with stories about the important people she had met or the exclusive events she had attended. The summer before my junior year brought the most significant sign of Janet's new priorities. She called one evening, her voice unnaturally bright. "Howard has the most wonderful opportunity," she announced. "His company is expanding to Phoenix, and he's going to oversee the new operation. We're moving at the end of the month." "Moving," I repeated, stunned. "To Arizona." "But what about your job? Your friend's mom? What about me?" "Oh, Victoria." She sighed as if I was being difficult. "I don't need to work anymore. Howard takes care of everything, and we'll make new friends. The club there is supposed to be even more exclusive than the one here. As for you, you're an adult now. You have your own life at college. This is my chance to finally have the life I deserve." The conversation ended with vague promises about visiting and staying in touch, but we both knew the physical distance would only widen the emotional gulf that had been growing between us. As I hung up the phone, I realized with painful clarity that my mother had chosen Howard and his lifestyle over me. The woman who had once been my entire world had abandoned me for a newer, shinier family that didn't include her own daughter. The day they left for Phoenix, Janet didn't even call to say goodbye. I received a text message with a photo of their private plane and the caption, "Off to our new adventure," as if she was announcing a vacation rather than leaving behind the daughter she had raised for 19 years. That fall, I experienced my first major bout of depression. The combination of academic pressure, financial stress, and the pain of my mother's abandonment left me struggling to get out of bed in the morning. My grades suffered, and I nearly lost my scholarship. If not for Michael and Samantha, who had also ended up at State University, I might have dropped out entirely. With their encouragement, I sought help at the University Counseling Center. Through weekly therapy sessions, I began to process my feelings of abandonment and grief. My therapist helped me understand that I was mourning not just the loss of my mother's presence in my life, but the loss of who I thought she was. The woman who had raised me to value education, hard work, and loyalty had revealed herself to be someone who could discard those values and me when a more attractive option presented itself. That first holiday season after Janet moved to Phoenix was particularly difficult. I couldn't afford to fly to Illinois to be with Michael's family, and the thought of spending Christmas alone in my dorm room was unbearable. It was Samantha who saved me, insisting I join her family in Millfield. The Johnsons welcomed me as they always had, setting an extra place at their table and hanging a stocking with my name on it. Mrs. Johnson hugged me tightly when I arrived, whispering, "You always have a home with us, honey." That night in Samantha's childhood bedroom, I cried for everything I had lost, but also felt gratitude for the family I had found. The next 3 years passed in a blur of hard work and determination. I graduated with honors, despite working nearly full-time throughout my college career. Janet attended my graduation ceremony, flying in alone the morning of and leaving immediately after. She looked tanned and polished in her expensive clothes, hugging me briefly and commenting on how cute my apartment was. She gave me an envelope containing a check from Howard, a graduation gift that felt more like a payoff than a celebration of my achievement. After graduation, I was fortunate to land an entry-level position at a marketing firm in Columbus. The salary wasn't impressive, but it was enough to support myself if I was careful. I moved into a small apartment with 2 other recent graduates, saving as much as I could each month. Contact with Janet became even more infrequent. I would see posts on her social media about charity galas and exotic vacations, but personal communication was limited to brief birthday and holiday calls. When I did speak to her, she seemed distracted and uninterested in my life, cutting our conversation short to attend to some social obligation or another. 2 years into my career, I received a promotion that came with a modest raise. Around the same time Michael proposed. We had been together for 5 years by then, supporting each other through college and into our early professional lives. The engagement was a bright spot in what had been a challenging journey. Then came the call that would change everything. My grandmother Rose, my father's mother, whom I had seen only occasionally throughout my life, had been diagnosed with advanced cancer. Her doctor gave her less than 6 months. To my surprise, she asked if I would visit her in Florida. I took a week of vacation and flew down to see her. The frail woman in the hospital bed barely resembled the stern but kind grandmother I remembered. After some small talk about my job and engagement, she got to the point of her invitation. "Victoria," she said, her voice weak but determined, "I need to tell you something important. Your father wasn't the man I raised him to be. The way he abandoned you and your mother, it broke my heart. I wanted to be more present in your life, but your father insisted it would only complicate things." She reached for a folder on her bedside table. "I've been putting money aside for you since the day you were born. It wasn't much at first, just $20 a month, but over time, with interest and some good investments, it's grown." Inside the folder was a bank statement showing an account in my name, with a balance of just over $60,000. "I want you to have this now," she said. Use it to buy yourself a home, a place that's truly yours. I know your mother left you to start her new life. I want you to know that you are not forgettable or disposable. You are loved, Victoria. I was speechless, tears streaming down my face. This woman, who had been a peripheral figure in my life, had been quietly supporting me all along. She had thought of me, planned for me, believed in me, while my own mother had walked away without a backward glance. Grandma Rose passed away 3 weeks after my visit. At her small funeral, I met cousins and aunts and uncles. I barely knew people who shared my blood but were strangers to me. They spoke kindly of Rose, describing her as generous and loving, but private, about her grief over my father's failures. Back in Columbus, Michael and I began looking for a small place to buy. With Grandma Rose's money and our modest savings, we could afford a down payment on a small condo or apartment. The search was both exciting and overwhelming, the idea of owning my own home, something I had thought was years away from achieving. After viewing dozens of properties, we found a one-bedroom apartment in a well-maintained building near a park. It wasn't fancy, certainly nothing like Howard's mansion, but it was solid and sunny with big windows and a small balcony. The price was right at the top of our budget, but the location was perfect walking distance to public transportation and in a safe neighborhood. To my surprise, Michael suggested I buy it on my own rather than jointly. "Your grandmother left this money to you," he said, "and with my student loans, my credit isn't as good as yours. We can live there together, but the place should be in your name. It will be our home, but legally your asset." His generosity and lack of ego only confirmed I had chosen the right partner. With his support, I navigated the intimidating process of home buying, signing what felt like hundreds of documents, and writing the largest check of my life for the down payment. The day I received the keys to my apartment was one of the proudest of my life. I stood in the empty space, sunlight streaming through the windows, and felt a sense of achievement and security I had never experienced before. This was mine, earned through my hard work and Grandma Rose's love. No one could take it away from me. Michael and I spent weekends painting and fixing up the place, shopping at thrift stores and discount outlets for furniture. We couldn't afford to do everything at once, so we prioritized a comfortable bed, a good couch, a dining table where we could host friends for dinner. Month by month, the apartment transformed from an empty space to a home filled with carefully chosen items that reflected our taste and values. I sent Janet photos of the apartment once it was presentable, hoping she might show some interest or pride in my achievement. Her response was a brief text. "Looks nice. Howard just finished renovating our guest house. Cost more than most people's entire homes." The contrast between her response and the reactions of my real support system was stark. Samantha and her parents drove up from Millfield to see the place, bringing a homemade quilt as a housewarming gift. Michael's family sent a care package of family recipes and kitchen essentials. Even my therapist, whom I still saw occasionally, expressed genuine happiness for this milestone. Over the next 2 years, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I continued to advance in my career, eventually being promoted to account manager. Michael completed his MBA and found a job with a consulting firm. We discussed marriage, but decided to wait until we had saved enough for the wedding we wanted, small but meaningful, with the people who had actually been there for us through the difficult years. My contact with Janet dwindled to almost nothing. I would see updates on social media, vacations in the Bahamas, a new car charity galas where she posed with minor celebrities. Occasionally, she would comment on my posts with generic phrases like "looks fun" or "beautiful photo," as if I was a distant acquaintance rather than her daughter. For the most part, I had made peace with the reality of our relationship. The mother I had known and loved for 18 years was gone, replaced by someone who valued status and wealth over family bonds. It hurt, but I had built a life filled with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them, or how I made them look to others. Then came the phone call that would upend everything I had carefully constructed. "Victoria." Janet's voice sounded strained, lacking its usual polished confidence. "I need to talk to you. It's important." It had been over 5 years since I had heard my mother's voice, without the artificial brightness she had adopted in her new life. The raw vulnerability in her tone caught me off guard, making my heart race despite my determination to remain emotionally distant. "What's going on?" "Mom," I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. There was a pause, followed by a sigh that seemed to contain years of weariness. "Howard and I are having problems. Serious problems. I need to see you." Warning bells immediately rang in my head. In the years since she had moved to Phoenix with Howard, Janet had never expressed a desire to visit me. Our interactions had been limited to her occasional trips back to Ohio, to see old friends during which she might squeeze in a brief lunch with me if her schedule permitted. The sudden urgency was suspicious, but the crack in her carefully constructed facade made me curious. "What kind of problems?" I pressed. "It's complicated," she hedged. "Too much to explain over the phone. I was hoping I could come stay with you for a little while, just until things get sorted out. I'd like to see your apartment in person anyway. Those photos you sent looked lovely." The mention of photos I had sent nearly 3 years ago, which had barely warranted a response at the time, only heightened my skepticism. Still, she was my mother. Despite everything, some part of me couldn't simply turn her away when she seemed to be in trouble. "When were you thinking of coming?" I asked cautiously. "Actually, I'm at the airport now," she admitted. "I can be in Columbus by this evening." The presumption that I would drop everything to accommodate her last-minute plans was so typically Janet it almost made me laugh. The old Janet would never have imposed this way, but Howard's Janet had developed a sense of entitlement that overrode common courtesy. "Mom, I have plans tonight," I said, which wasn't entirely true. "And you need to give me some notice before showing up on my doorstep." Her voice immediately took on a wounded tone. "Victoria, I'm your mother. I don't need an invitation to see my own daughter." The irony of this statement after years of minimal contact wasn't lost on me, but I chose not to point it out. Instead, I took a deep breath and set a boundary. "You can come tomorrow," I said firmly. "I'll pick you up from the airport if you send me your flight details. But I need to know how long you're planning to stay." Another pause. "Just a couple of weeks," she said finally. "Until I figure things out with Howard." After getting her flight information and ending the call, I immediately contacted Michael, who was away on a business trip. His concern mirrored my own. "This doesn't sound right, Vic," he said. "She hasn't shown any interest in your life for years, and suddenly she needs to stay with you. Be careful." The next day I picked Janet up from the airport. She looked thinner than I remembered the designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame. The confident, polished woman who had emerged after meeting Howard was diminished somehow, though she still made an effort with perfect makeup and styled hair. As we drove to my apartment, she filled the silence with vague complaints about Howard's unreasonable behavior and impossible expectations, but offered no concrete explanation for their problems or her sudden appearance in Columbus. When we arrived at my apartment building, her eyes narrowed slightly. "This is it?" she asked, looking up at the modest structure. "It's smaller than I expected." "It's perfect for me," I replied, already regretting my decision to let her stay. Inside, she walked through each room making comments that were framed as compliments, but felt like criticisms. "You've done so much with such a tiny kitchen. This couch is charming, very retro. The bedroom is cozy, isn't it?" I showed her the pull-out sofa where she would be sleeping, expecting complaints. But she merely nodded and asked where she could put her suitcase. As she unpacked, I noticed the designer labels on every item, a stark contrast to our surroundings. That first evening was awkward. We ordered takeout and sat at my small dining table. The conversation stilted and superficial. Janet asked perfunctory questions about my job, but seemed uninterested in my answers. Instead, she kept returning to complaints about Howard, though still in vague terms that gave me no real understanding of what had happened. "He's changed," she said, pushing her barely touched food around her plate. "He's not the man I married?" "What exactly did he do?" I asked, growing frustrated with her evasiveness. Janet sighed dramatically. "It's just everything. The way he controls the money, the way he expects me to be the perfect hostess, the way he talks to me in front of his friends." None of this sounded new. Howard had always been controlling and status-obsessed. I wondered what had really changed to make her leave. "Did you actually leave him?" I asked. "Or is this just a cooling-off period?" She looked away, avoiding my eyes. We're taking some time apart. He thinks I'm staying with a friend in Sedona. I didn't tell him I was coming here. The revelation that she was essentially hiding from her husband in my apartment did nothing to ease my concerns. What exactly had I gotten myself into? The next morning, Janet slept late while I went to work. When I returned in the evening, I found she had rearranged my living room furniture and replaced my shower curtain with a new one she had purchased. The old one had mildew, she explained when I questioned her, and the furniture arrangement wasn't maximizing the space properly. Before I could respond, she continued, I hope you don't mind, but I invited a few friends over tomorrow evening, just some people I know from my old life here. I thought it would be nice to catch up. The casual way she had taken over my space and made decisions without consulting me was infuriating, but I bit my tongue. 2 weeks. I just had to survive 2 weeks of this. Fine, I said tightly, but please ask before inviting people to my home in the future. Janet looked wounded. I didn't think I needed permission. I used to change your diapers, Victoria. It's not like we're roommates who just met. No, I agreed. Roommates would probably show more respect for each other's space. The comment hung in the air between us, Janet's face registering shock at my pushback. For a moment, I glimpsed the mother I used to know, someone capable of self-reflection and consideration for others. But it passed quickly, replaced by a defensive expression. I'm sorry if I overstepped, she said, though her tone suggested she was anything but sorry. I'll be sure to consult you about every little thing from now on. The next evening, Janet's few friends turned out to be 8 people, most of whom I had never met. They filled my small living room with loud voices, an expensive perfume, drinking the wine they had brought, and treating me like the help in my own home. Janet held court on my couch, sharing dramatic stories of her life in Phoenix, while carefully avoiding any mention of current troubles with Howard. When everyone finally left just after midnight, I was exhausted and irritated. Janet, however, seemed energized by the social interaction. That was wonderful, she gushed as she half-heartedly helped me clean up. We should do it again before I leave. Mom, I said firmly, this is my home. You can't just turn it into your personal entertainment venue. She waved a dismissive hand. Don't be so serious, Victoria. It was just a little get-together. As the days passed, Janet showed no signs of actually dealing with her marital problems or making plans for her future. Instead, she seemed to be settling in, taking over more and more of my space. She used my computer without asking, borrowed my clothes without returning them, and left her belongings scattered throughout the apartment. One evening, about a week into her stay, I came home to find her on the phone speaking in hushed tones. When she saw me, she quickly ended the call. Who was that? I asked, suspicious of her secretive behavior. Just an old friend, she said vaguely, avoiding my eyes. Listen, Victoria, I've been thinking, 2 weeks might not be enough time. Would it be terrible if I stayed a little longer? The thought of extending her visit made my stomach clench. How much longer are we talking about? Janet shrugged. I'm not sure yet. I need to figure some things out. Like what? I pressed. You've been here a week and you haven't mentioned any concrete plans. Are you going back to Howard? Are you leaving him? What exactly are you figuring out? She looked offended by my questions. These are complicated adult issues, Victoria. I can't just make snap decisions about my marriage. I am an adult, I reminded her, and this is my home. I deserve to know how long you're planning to impose on me. The word impose clearly stung, and for a moment I felt guilty. But then I remembered the years of neglect, the casual way she had abandoned me for Howard and his lifestyle. My guilt evaporated. Fine, she said coldly. I'll start looking for other arrangements. But she didn't. Instead, she continued her pattern of taking over my space and time without consideration. Michael, who had returned from his business trip, started avoiding my apartment, uncomfortable with Janet's intrusive presence. Our relationship, solid for years, began to show strain under the pressure of my mother's extended visit. Then came the day I returned home early from work with a migraine to find Janet going through my desk drawers. She jumped when I entered, guilt written across her face. What are you doing? I demanded. I was just looking for some aspirin, she claimed, though there was a bottle clearly visible on the bathroom counter. My suspicion aroused, I began paying closer attention to her activities. I noticed her studying my mail, lingering over bank statements and mortgage documents. She asked casual but probing questions about my finances, how I had afforded the apartment, what kind of mortgage I had. 2 weeks stretched into 3, with no sign of Janet making plans to leave. One night, after she had gone to bed, I checked my email and discovered she had accessed my accounts, leaving several messages marked as read that I had never opened. Among them was an email from my mortgage company that contained sensitive financial information. The next morning, I confronted her. "Mom, have you been going through my emails, my financial documents?" Instead of denying it, Janet went on the offensive. "I was just trying to understand your situation better. As your mother, I have a right to know about your life." "No, you don't," I said firmly. "You gave up that right when you chose Howard over me. You can't abandon me for years and then come back expecting full access to my life." Her face hardened. "Is that what this is about? You're still upset that I remarried grow-up Victoria. I deserved a chance at happiness." "This isn't about your remarriage," I clarified, though in some ways it was. "This is about you invading my privacy now." Janet crossed her arms defensively. "I wasn't invading anything. I was concerned. This apartment, for instance. How did you afford it? You've been out of college for 4 years, on an entry-level salary. It doesn't add up." The implication that I had done something underhanded to acquire my home was infuriating. "I worked hard," I said through gritted teeth. "I saved. And I had help." "What kind of help?" She pressed, eyes narrowing. "Because if someone gave you money as your mother, I should have been informed." I laughed bitterly. "Why? So you could ask for your cut?" "You haven't been my mother in any meaningful way for years." The words hung in the air between us, harsh, but true. Janet's face crumpled momentarily before hardening into a mask of indignation. "How dare you?" she hissed. "After everything I sacrificed for you." "What exactly did you sacrifice?" I demanded. "You walked away from me without a backward glance the minute something better came along. You chose Howard and his money and status over your own daughter." "That's not fair," she protested. "I was thinking of both of us. Howard offered us a better life." "No," I corrected her. "He offered you a better life. I was just excess baggage that didn't fit with his perfect image." Janet was silent for a long moment, then changed tactics entirely. "You still haven't answered my question. How did you afford this place?" I sighed, seeing no reason to hide the truth. "Grandma Rose left me some money. She had been saving for me my entire life." Janet's expression shifted from anger to calculation so quickly it was almost comical. "Your father's mother, the one who barely acknowledged your existence. She left you money." "She did more than acknowledge me," I said quietly. "She was putting aside money for me every month since I was born. She wanted to make sure I had a home security." "How much?" Janet demanded. "That's none of your business. As your mother, I have a right to know about inheritances. Legally, I should have been consulted." I stared at her, realization dawning. "Is that what this visit is really about? You found out somehow that Rose left me money and you came to get your share." The flash of guilt in her eyes confirmed my suspicion. "How did you find out Howard has a private investigator or something?" Janet looked away. "We ran into your cousin at a charity event in Phoenix. She mentioned how generous Rose had been to you before she died." The pieces fell into place. Janet hadn't come because she was having problems with Howard. She had come because she had learned I had received money, and in her entitled state believed she deserved a portion of it. "Get out," I said quietly. "Excuse me." She looked genuinely shocked. "Get out of my apartment, pack your things and leave. Now." Janet's shock transformed into righteous indignation. "You can't throw me out. I'm your mother, and frankly, that money should have come to me. I'm the one who raised you alone while your father contributed nothing." "The money came from his mother, not him," I pointed out. "And she gave it to me, not you. It's mine, legally and morally." "Well," Janet said, her voice taking on a dangerous edge, "we'll see about that. I've been talking to a lawyer friend. He says I might have a claim on this property since I was never notified about the inheritance." The threat was clear, and it sent a chill down my spine. Would she really try to take legal action to claim my home? Looking at the cold calculation in her eyes, I realized she might. "Your lawyer friend is wrong," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "The money was left directly to me. You have no claim. Janet smiled thinly. We'll let the courts decide that, shall we? In the meantime, since this property is in dispute, I think I'll stay right here. In that moment, I saw my mother clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. The woman who had raised me with love and sacrifice had been replaced by someone consumed by greed and entitlement. Howard hadn't changed her. He had simply brought out aspects of her personality that had always been there dormant until given the opportunity to flourish. Stay if you want, I said coldly, but I'm calling a lawyer tomorrow, and I'm changing the locks the minute you leave this apartment. The battle lines had been drawn. My own mother was threatening to take my home, the one thing that represented security and achievement in my life. I would not let her win. That night was one of the tensest of my life. Janet and I avoided each other, moving around the apartment like hostile strangers. I slept with my bedroom door locked irrationally, afraid she might try to access my personal documents while I was asleep. In the morning, I left early for work, calling Michael from my car. She's trying to take my apartment, I explained, still in shock at the turn of events. She claims she has some legal right to the money Grandma Rose left me. That's ridiculous, Michael said. The money was left to you directly. Janet has no claim to it. She's talking about lawyers, I said, fear creeping into my voice. What if she actually sues me? I can't afford a lengthy legal battle. Let me talk to my cousin, Michael offered. She's a real estate attorney. She can tell us if Janet has any legitimate claim. Throughout the day, I was distracted and anxious, barely able to focus on my work. When I returned to my apartment that evening, I found Janet had been busy in my absence. She had clearly been through more of my things, drawers left slightly open, papers rearranged. Most disturbingly, my important documents, including the deed to my apartment and the paperwork from Grandma Rose's bequest, had been moved from their folder. Janet herself was on the phone in the living room, speaking too quietly for me to hear clearly. When she saw me, she ended her call abruptly. We need to talk, she said, her tone businesslike. I crossed my arms defensively. I'm not discussing anything with you until I've spoken to my lawyer. Janet smiled thinly. Your lawyer? Can you even afford one on your meager salary? Howard and I have an entire legal team at our disposal. The mention of Howard confirmed my suspicion that their marital problems had been a fabrication. This had been a calculated move from the beginning. If you actually have legal grounds, why the subterfuge? I demanded. Why make up a story about problems with Howard? Why not just come out and say you wanted a share of the inheritance? Would you have let me stay if I had? She countered. Besides, I needed to see the property, understand what we're dealing with. The casual we turned my stomach. In Janet's mind, she and Howard were a unit working together to claim what she believed was rightfully hers, even if it meant taking from her own daughter. There is no we here, I said firmly. This is my apartment purchased with money that was legally given to me. You have no claim to it. That's not what my lawyer says, Janet replied. As your parent, I should have been notified of any significant inheritance. The fact that I wasn't opens the door for legal action. I had no idea if this was true or just an intimidation tactic. Either way, I needed advice from someone who actually had my interests at heart. I'm going out, I announced, grabbing my keys. Don't touch my things while I'm gone. Where are you going? Janet demanded. That's none of your business, I replied, echoing her words from years earlier when she had refused to share details of her life with me. I drove to a coffee shop and called Aunt Grace, my mother's sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in months. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm and surprised. Victoria, this is an unexpected pleasure. How are you, sweetheart? The genuine affection in her tone made my eyes sting with tears. I explained the situation as succinctly as I could, from Janet's surprise visit to her threat of legal action. Oh, Victoria, Grace sighed when I finished. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but this isn't the first time Janet has tried something like this. What do you mean? I asked. Your mother has always had complicated feelings about money, Grace explained cautiously. When our grandmother left me her antique jewelry collection, Janet tried to claim it was meant to be split between us, even though the will specifically named me. And when I got my book contract, she suddenly needed a loan for a business opportunity that never materialized. The pattern sounded depressingly familiar. So you think this is just another grab for money? I think, Grace said carefully, that your mother has convinced herself she deserves a portion of anything good that happens to people around her. And Howard has only encouraged this mindset. They're well matched in that way. The confirmation of my mother's character was both painful and oddly relieving. I wasn't misinterpreting the situation or overreacting. Janet really was trying to take advantage of me. What should I do? I asked. First, protect yourself, Grace advised. Secure all your important documents. Don't leave Janet alone in your apartment if you can help it. And yes, consult with a lawyer immediately. I'm not sure I can afford one, I admitted. My savings are tight right now. I'll help, Grace offered without hesitation. I know a good attorney in Columbus who owes me a favor. Let me make a call. I felt a rush of gratitude for this aunt, who had always been kind to me, but whom I had never really appreciated until now. Thank you, Grace. I don't know what I would do without you. Family supports family, she said simply. Real family, not people who only show up when they want something. When I returned to the apartment, Janet was on the couch scrolling through her phone with a smug expression. I've been in touch with Howard, she announced without looking up. He's flying in tomorrow to discuss our options regarding the property. There are no options, I stated firmly. The apartment is mine, and you need to be gone by tomorrow. Janet looked up surprised by my confidence. You don't understand how these things work, Victoria. Howard has connections. We can make this very difficult for you. Try, I challenged, channeling a strength I didn't entirely feel. But understand this, the minute you file any legal action against me, I will never speak to you again. Whatever relationship we still have will be permanently destroyed. Is that really what you want? For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across Janet's face. Then her expression hardened. You're being dramatic. This is business, not personal. Taking your daughters home is very personal, I countered. And it shows exactly what kind of person you've become. The next morning, I called in sick to work, unwilling to leave Janet alone in my apartment again. The atmosphere was frigid as we moved around each other, neither willing to engage in conversation. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a smartly dressed woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense expression. Victoria Williams, she asked. When I nodded, she handed me a business card. I'm Diane Summers, the attorney your Aunt Grace contacted. May I come in? Janet appeared behind me, eyes narrowing at the mention of an attorney. Who's this? My lawyer, I said, stepping aside to let Diane enter. Mom, why don't you give us some privacy? Absolutely not, Janet protested. This concerns me too. Diane smiled thinly. Actually, Mrs. Graham, it doesn't. Not legally. But you're welcome to call your own counsel if you wish to discuss this further. Janet's face flushed with anger, but she retreated to the guest room, slamming the door behind her. Diane and I sat at the dining table, where I showed her all the documentation related to Grandma Rose's gift and my purchase of the apartment. After reviewing everything, Diane looked up with a reassuring smile. Your aunt was right to call me. This is a straightforward case of harassment and potential fraud. Your mother has absolutely no legal claim to either the inheritance or the property. Relief washed over me. So she was bluffing about having legal grounds. Completely, Diane confirmed. The inheritance was left directly to you as an adult. There was no requirement to notify any parent. And the property was purchased solely in your name, with clear documentation of where the funds originated. She pulled out a document from her briefcase. I've prepared a formal notice for your mother informing her that any attempt to claim ownership of your property will be met with immediate legal action, including potential charges of harassment and attempted fraud. The document looked impressively official with legal language I barely understood, but trusted would protect me. What about Howard? She says he's coming to help her pursue this. Diane's smile turned predatory. I'd be delighted to meet with Mr. Graham. I have some questions about his potential involvement in what could be construed as a conspiracy to defraud. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of control returning. So what do I do now? "Give this to your mother," Diane instructed, handing me the document. "Inform her she has 24 hours to vacate your property. If she refuses or continues to make claims on your apartment, we'll file for a formal eviction and restraining order." After Diane left, I took a deep breath and knocked on the guest room door. Janet opened it with a defiant expression that faltered when I handed her the legal notice. "What's this?" she demanded. "Official notice that you have no claim to my apartment and must vacate the premises within 24 hours, I explained calmly. "My attorney has confirmed that any legal action you attempt will be groundless and potentially open you to countercharges." Janet scanned the document, her face growing paler with each paragraph. "This is ridiculous. Howard will do nothing," I interrupted, "unless he wants to face charges himself. This isn't Phoenix, Mom. Your connections and money won't help you take what's mine." She looked up, eyes blazing. "You ungrateful child. After everything I've done for you." The accusation might have hurt once, but now it just seemed pathetic. "What exactly have you done for me in the past 7 years, Mom? You abandoned me for Howard and his lifestyle. You've barely been present in my life, and now you come back only because you think you can get something from me." "That's not true," she protested weakly. "I love you, Victoria." "If this is your version of love, I want no part of it," I said quietly. "Real love doesn't try to take. It gives, like Grandma Rose gave to me, like Michael gives to me, like Samantha and her family and Aunt Grace give to me." Janet's phone rang, interrupting our confrontation. She answered it, turning away from me. "Howard?" "Yes, I'm still here." "No, it's more complicated than we thought." I left her to her conversation, feeling strangely calm. The next morning, Janet was gone when I woke up. She had taken all her belongings, leaving only a brief note. "This isn't over." But I knew it was, at least this chapter of it. Later that day, I received a call from Aunt Grace. "Janet called me," she said without preamble. "She's furious. She claims you've turned against her, that you've betrayed her." "What did you tell her?" I asked, bracing for more family division. "I told her she should be ashamed of herself," Grace replied firmly, "and that if she ever tries to take advantage of you again, she'll have me to deal with as well." The support brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Grace, for everything." "You're stronger than you know, Victoria," she said gently. "Standing up to Janet was the right thing to do. I'm proud of you." In the weeks that followed, I heard through family connections that Janet had returned to Phoenix and to Howard. They had apparently worked through their issues, which I now understood had never existed, except as a pretext for Janet to gain access to my home and finances. Several relatives who had initially believed Janet's version of events, in which I had cruelly evicted my own mother during a time of need, eventually learned the truth and reached out to apologize. Some relationships were repaired, while others remained damaged beyond repair. I learned to accept that family isn't always defined by blood. Michael, who had been my rock throughout the ordeal, proposed again this time with a definite wedding date. "Life's too short to wait," he said, "and I want to build a family with you, one based on love and respect, not obligation and greed." We were married 6 months later, in a small ceremony attended by those who had truly supported us: Aunt Grace, Samantha, and her parents, Michael's family and friends who had become as close as relatives. Janet was not invited, though I sent her a wedding announcement as a courtesy. She responded with an expensive gift, sent directly from the store, not even personally wrapped, with a generic card signed by both her and Howard. 2 years after the confrontation, I received an email from Janet. Howard's business had collapsed due to poor investments, and they had been forced to downsize significantly. She expressed regret for her actions and asked if we could rebuild our relationship. It was the closest thing to an apology I expected to receive. I considered ignoring the message, but ultimately decided to respond. I agreed to limited contact coffee once a month, with clear boundaries about what was and wasn't acceptable conversation. Janet, humbled by her changed circumstances, agreed to my terms. Our first meeting was awkward, neither of us sure how to relate to each other after everything that had happened. But as we continued our cautious reconnection, I began to see glimpses of the mother I had once known and loved. Without Howard's influence and wealth, Janet slowly returned to some of her old values, finding joy in simple pleasures rather than status symbols. I never fully trusted her again, and our relationship would never be what it once was. But I found a measure of peace in establishing a new kind of connection, one based on honesty about the past and clear boundaries for the future. Through this painful journey, I learned that true family isn't defined by blood or obligation, but by respect, support, and love that asks for nothing in return. I learned that standing up for myself wasn't selfish, but necessary for my own well being. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that I was stronger than I had ever imagined, capable of facing betrayal and coming through it with my dignity and values intact. Today, my home remains my sanctuary, a symbol of what I've accomplished and the challenges I've overcome. When I look around at the walls that are truly mine, I feel gratitude for Grandma Rose's generosity and foresight for the friends and family who stood by me, and for my own courage in protecting what was rightfully mine. Have you ever had to stand up to family who tried to take advantage of you? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps anyone going through similar struggles to find their own strength.